gumball bushes grew, there was a huge chocolate mountain. And way up at the top of the mountain was a creature known as the Snoozy-Woos. Now it's been said that the Snoozy-Woos knows the answer to the secret of life. But nobody's ever gotten it, because no one's gotten to the top of the mountain. Because along the way there are three creatures, each with a riddle trying to keep anyone from getting to the top. Now down at the bottom of the chocolate mountain was the city of Drobbles. Drobbles are very old, very short-looking creatures, and they're to do nothing during their waking hours except work. One of the Drobbles was named George, and George's job was to ride on a bicycle all day long in order to run the city's clocks. But George liked to daydream, and when he would daydream about climbing the mountain, he would stop riding his bicycle. And this happened enough times that the people of the city of Drobbles banished him and told him not to return until he came back with the secret of life. So George started climbing up the mountain. He hadn't been climbing more than 5 minutes when he ran into one of those big, ugly slips. Oh, words cannot describe this cross between a goblin and a dragon. The Schlip looked down at George and said to him, "Do you know what is to happen, Drobble?" And George said, "No, I don't." "For you to continue on your journey, you must answer my riddle correctly." And George said, "So be it." The Schlip leaned back against the mountain and said, "What is it that is hot or cold, and ye can catch, but not hold?" George thought for a moment. He said, "Well, that sounds like my breath." The Schlip looked at George and nodded and said, "Yes, it is indeed your breath, and may I say, well done. You may pass. But let me warn you, the next 2 riddles will be more difficult, and the next 2 creatures more impatient. So good luck. You'll need it." But George ignored the warning of the Schlip and just kept on going on his way. And as he was going along, he was thinking, well, this is really pretty easy. Through that first riddle, that wasn't that hard. I can't believe nobody's ever gotten to the top of the mountain before. This is going to be a piece of cake. And the thing is, in stories like this, when you think like that, bad things tend to happen. And just then George came around the corner of the mountain and he found himself face to face with a Snifflechuck. Snifflechucks have 6 arms and 8 legs and green, scaly skin. And the Snifflechuck looked down at George, and in her high-pitched, witch-like voice, she said, "Do you know what is to happen, Drobble?" And George said, "Yes, if I am to continue on my journey, I must answer your riddle correctly." "And if you do not answer my riddle correctly, what then?" And George said, "I do not know." "If you do not answer my riddle correctly, then I shall have lunch." To which she laughed uncontrollably. For quite some time. Well, now George was a lot more frightened by this creature, but he knew he couldn't turn back, so he said, "All right, Snifflechuck, I'm ready for your riddle." She looked at him and she said, "What is it that is weak or strong, but doesn't last for very long?" And George didn't know what to say. He tried stalling by saying, "Please just give me a moment." Now, Snifflechucks, as you know, are very impatient creatures, especially hungry ones like this one. And she said, "No, no, what is your answer? Tell me, tell me, tell me." And George didn't know what to say until suddenly a gust of wind came up and it blew his head off. And he smiled and he looked up and he said, "Sorry, Snifflechuck, no lunch for you today. The answer to your riddle is the wind." The Snifflechuck snorted and disgustedly said, "Yes, that is the right and correct answer. You may pass, but you'll never get the last riddle." To which she laughed uncontrollably again. For quite some time. Well, now George was really frightened, and he was going along the side of the mountain, just really scared. But the longer he went, no more creatures, and he started thinking, well, you know, maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe there's only 2. Maybe I can get to the top. And then as he walked along a little longer, he thought, you know, I've answered those first 2 riddles. I got a little bit of luck on that last one, but I should be able to get through the final one without any trouble. This will be a piece of cake. I'll get to the top of the mountain and have the answer to the secret of life. And the thing is, in stories like this, when you think like that, bad things tend to happen. And George came around the corner of the mountain, and he found himself face to face with the red, 15-foot-tall, 3-headed, fire-breathing Paragopolis. George had never been so frightened in his entire life. The middle head of the Paragopolis looked down at George and said to him, "Well done on reaching this point, Drobble. Others have gotten past those 2 easy riddles, but none have gotten past ours." And all three heads began to laugh together. Ah, 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 ah. So loudly, in fact, and they shook the mountain. The people in the city below thought it was about to storm. Well, George knew he couldn't turn on, so he said, "Oh, all right, I'm ready for your riddle." The middle head looked at him and said, "What is it that comes and goes in the rains and in the snows, and it covers the earth from the moment of birth?" George's jaw dropped. He had never heard such a hard riddle. He sat down and began to cry. "Oh, I wish I was back home. Why did I have to stop riding that bicycle?" And then he looked up and he could see the snoozy-woos just 30 feet above him. And then he looked up at the night sky. "Oh, I wish I was in my bed at home." And then he stopped and he thought for a moment. And then he looked up and he realized he had the answer. He looked up at the Paragopolis and he said, "Your riddle is so hard, it's easy. The answer is the night." All three heads of the Paragopolis wore the same shocked look. And then the Paragopolis stepped back and bowed and motioned for George to go by. And he marched proudly past. He climbed the last 30 feet to the top of the mountain, and there he saw the snoozy-woos, asleep. Then he went over to him and he said, "Excuse me, Mr. Snoozy-woo, sir, could I have the answer to the secret of life?" And the snoozy-woos woke up with a start. And he looked at George, and then he reached down and he pulled out an envelope. And then he said, "Here." And then he went back to sleep. Well, George eagerly ripped open the envelope and he looked inside and he said, "Oh no, not another riddle. Oh well, where is the only place to be, the only place for me? The place in my hopes and dreams where I can find happiness, it seems." And George stopped and he thought for a moment and he said, "Well, that sounds like at home. And my hopes and dreams, those are inside of me." And he thought for a moment. And then he smiled. And then he started climbing back down the mountain. And he was the happiest Drobble in the land. The end.